very good friend. He is an attorney, does a lot of litigation. He is an instructor. He's provided instruction and mediation. He's a mediator. He's a former board member for the National Association for Community Mediation. He is an entrepreneur. He has his own business, and he is a very gifted musician. You never know that. A drummer. Amazing. And we had a chance to work together when we both were on the board for NAFCM. And we've managed to stay in touch over the years. And he has a wealth of information that I think will be beneficial to all of you. So I want you to take advantage to listen, learn, ask questions. He's very open, very giving with his knowledge. So I am going to turn it over to Jed Friedland.
Thank you, Renata. It's nice to see you. And you forgot that we also co-authored a piece together.
Yes, we did some writing. They probably hate me for it too. Like, you don't have to be an attorney to be a mediator.
That's right. So, well, thank you everyone for having me here today. We're here to talk about how to create value at every stage of conflict, or as I like to talk of it, how to show up at the showdown. I want to explore a smattering of ideas today. I know we only have about an hour and a half, so I'm going to pick and choose as we go in real time some of the salient points that I think will get everyone focused on the path towards how to create value at every stage of the conflict. I'll apologize in advance to the extent that I will look away occasionally as I'm kind of glancing at notes and picking what we're going to discuss. And also because some of what I'm going to launch into may be a little counterintuitive in terms of why we'd be talking about this in the context of creating value at every stage of conflict. So why don't we just get started? First of all, I'd like to define our terms. What is conflict? What is conflict? Does anyone have a definition of conflict? Please chime in.
An interruption of or to homeostasis, or
okay,
you have your balance and you have something that disrupts that balance, whether it's typically not desired or it's typically problematic, but it is disruptive.
Okay.
To whatever, I think.
So disruption certainly is an element. Other people want to chime in with ideas? I always like to let you just talk as at will. It's going to be kind of an interactive enterprise. I'll submit that there's a couple things to consider, and some of these may be basic. Conflict arises in time. This will become important because time is one of the resources and elements we're going to get to talk about in which conflict arises. Conflict arises in space, whether it's virtual space or physical space, or metaphorical space. We'll talk about that too. It generally involves humanity. It becomes important because there's a lot about our humanity that will come into play. A lot of this is not new to you, and of course you've been studying it, possibly even teaching it. Conflict arises in context, which is critically important because it tends to create the contours and textures of the conflict depending upon the context in which it arises. Sometimes it's called a clash or an incompatibility or an opposition, often to needs or interests. There's usually something at stake, and there are usually stakeholders. So just to flesh out a little bit some of your comments earlier, is Otika? I want to get your name correct.
Otika?
Otika. And I still don't know what conflict is, even with all of that. And the reason is because a lot of these things presume certainty that may or may not actually exist in the equation. There may or may not actually be a clash. There may or may not actually be an incompatibility. There may or may not actually be, in your words or the way you expressed it, a lack of balance. It might be that it's perceived that way and the realities are less so. And so these are some of the things that I'd like to explore as well. I'm always left a little confused whenever I get into the subject of, well, whatever subject this is that we're talking about. Is it communication or conflict or peace building or whatever it is we're actually talking about? I always get confused when I really drill down into the definitions. Give you an example. My middle name is Peace. And so I've had a chance to think about what that might mean. I've looked in the dictionary, and the more I look at a definition, the more confused I get. I've seen peace building and peacemaking and peacekeeping. And so I don't want to take anything for granted as we move forward with what we're talking about or how we're talking about it. And I don't mean to be painstakingly difficult with the words, but sometimes it gives a new perspective. So anybody here have any experience with conflict?
Oh, yes.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I think Sarah has a question or something too. I think she has her hand up.
Oh, yes. Okay. Please. And Sarah, you're always welcome to just chime in with a question.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm calling from Cameroon, and this is we are at about 3 a.m. in the morning.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and to me, conflict is I don't look at conflict as being negative, because conflict is inevitable. Because we have conflict, which is you have the inter-conflict, the intra, and the inter. So it is something that it is our daily life. Conflict, because you have conflict within your thoughts. You have conflicting thoughts. You have with friends, you have some kind of disagreements. And it all depends on how you handle the conflict. So that's when the way you handle it will either make it becomes dysfunctional, or it helps to build. Because conflict most often, if it's not properly handled, it escalates and gets to a violent conflict, which now has to do with arms or whatever it takes for any of the parties to express their grievances or disagreements. And so to me, conflict is just life. Conflict is life.
And I would agree with you. And, you know, it's interesting that you would mention the internal and the external, because that's part of the theme that I'd like to stress today. Much of what I'm going to speak about today has an internal and an external manifestation. And by that, I mean, there are going to be what I might call truths that will become evident both internally with respect to your relationship with self, as well as externally with relationship to other. And those dynamics, when we explore conflict, become very interesting, because oftentimes the techniques, the strategies that we use with other can also be applied to self. So does anyone here think that conflict is avoidable? I mean, we're all folks of good judgment, aren't we?
I think violent conflict is avoidable.
Violent conflict. Okay, that's
Yes.
a good start. Thank goodness for that.
And I would say it's avoidable, but it's not always a good idea to avoid it, as a previous avoider myself.
Okay.
Because it tends to not go away when you avoid it.
Now we're hinting a little bit at conflict strategies, right? Avoidance being perhaps a conflict strategy. Is anyone here familiar with the conflict strategies? There's the Killman model, I think, and there's a few other models. You've seen those: avoidance and collaboration and
Compromise.
compromise.
Mhm.
That's right. So one of the things that I always find interesting about that model is, at least when people initially embrace it, they tend to have viewpoints about various strategies. For example, avoidance, we just talked about. And the general thought is, well, gee, avoidance, that's a bad strategy. Sometimes avoidance is a wonderful strategy.
Mhm.
Sometimes avoidance is absolutely necessary. So I hope to explore some of those interesting contradictions, let's just say paradoxes, as we go. Since we only have a short amount of time, I'm going to kind of blast ahead and see if we can play a game. First of all, before we start, here are the two general assumptions that I want to proceed with today. The first assumption is that the future is a set of probability streams where any number of potential outcomes could come out of a set of circumstances. The second thought is that one can dramatically increase the probability of a good result, even in conflict. If we can keep those two things in mind, it will assist with our discussion of how we might be able to create value at every step in conflict. Because it sounds like we're all in agreement that conflict is part of life, that maybe there are aspects of conflict that are avoidable, but at least at some level, there's probably conflict that's unavoidable. Even the suggestion was made there might be internal conflicts that are unavoidable and just part of life. So let's play a quick game. And it's going to be well, before we do that, because we got just a little bit of time, I'd like to just do this. I'm going to go around the room here, and we've got a few folks, enough to, we should be able to do this. And what I invite you to do, if you'd like to participate, is in one very simple sentence, only one sentence, because we don't have a lot of time. I'd like you to tell us why you're taking these studies, what you're hoping to get out of the class or out of the studies, maybe a little bit about who you are, where you came from, where you're headed, why you're here, how you're doing, all in one sentence, something like this. Hi, I'm Jed. I'm an attorney and I'm a mediator. I'm here to share some ideas with you about conflict and creating value at every stage of conflict. I'm headed in the direction of sharing this message with as many people as I can. My journey starts right now. And I'm doing this because I have a love for it, and I enjoy engaging with others and sharing and hearing their ideas. And as far as how I'm doing, I'm tired today, but I'm enthusiastic and happy to be here, and that's my story. So something very quick, like an elevator speech, one long sentence, so I can get an idea of what it is about the class that brings you here. And can I start with Julie, or can I start with you?
Sure. So I'm the one that stuck around after they finished the classes, because we aren't finished learning. I think a lot of us that have already graduated, and there's continues to be an opportunity to learn more and do more. So I am, and I just lost all the train of thought of all the other things that are supposed to go into this. So I'm a terrible example.
That's okay.
Yeah, so my memory's really short, as you all can see now. But now I just continue to learn and be a part of everything I can learn about peace and communication.
All right, thank you. And I hope you don't mind if I call on each of you, and if you don't want to say anything, it's okay too. Just pronounce your name. Otika?
Good job, Julie. That was courageous of you. I'm Otika Macklin, and I am in my last quarter, I believe, or term, I believe. And I am here. I'm a social worker with the VA, and I'm here to develop better negotiation skills, peace building skills that will assist me in clinical social work, working with veterans, combat combat veterans, chronically ill veterans, homeless veterans, older adults, stuff like that, and eventually go into administration at the VA. I'm a lifelong learner. So, and also I was influenced by my mom, who was a successful mediator. Thank
All
you.
right, excellent. Thank you. Meager?
Hi, good evening, Jed and everyone. So my name is Meager Chappelle. I'm a career Navy officer. I'm a lifelong academic, and I'm also a certified mediator in the state of Florida, the Civil Circuit and Family Court. I saw this curriculum and it absolutely fascinated me, and I am glad so that I have not proven my suspicions wrong. It has been absolutely wonderful. Mediating between one or two people is, I don't want to say it's easy, but it's a different ball game. I've always been a little bit hesitant when it comes to large groups, mediating large group conflict. And I believe that I'm definitely in the right place to sharpen that skill set. I've tremendously enjoyed this program thus far and have learned a lot in just a very short time from Professor Julian and many others. So that is what I'm working on, that particular skill set.
All right, excellent. Thank you. Anisha? Anisha, are you there? Okay, Sarah?
Okay, thank you. I'm Sarah Duval, from Cameroon, and I've had some trainings in mediation, and I got into this field because we found ourselves in a conflict-stricken region, the English-speaking part of Cameroon, and as women and as a women leader, because I heard a coalition of about 150 women, grassroots women organization, and I had no option but to get into these, and because we had to start talking to both the separatists and the government, and we needed skills to know how to maneuver ourselves. And that also led me to go back to do another master's in peace, conflict, and international relations, because I just believe I needed to learn more and more and more, because every day in our country, the dynamics, the change. And I just know that with this course, I need to be here because you have experts that have gone through, that have mediated successfully. And I know here I will have to pick up knowledge as well as best practices, as well as what to do and what not to do. So I am in that position of just keep learning, because if we don't have that kind of sustainable peace that we seek, then I just have to be learning, because I also have to take it back to the women and train them on how to do the community mediation and every other thing, so that their communities can be able to solve little conflicts so that it doesn't escalate. Because when we have already a conflict, we have latent conflicts that grow within conflict, and we must train women on how to handle those preliminary stages so that it doesn't get to a stage where we can't handle. So I just find myself like, I need to learn and I need to learn.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Rachel, do you have anything to add?
Yes, give me a second. Hi, I'm Rachel. Thank you for being with us tonight. I have my undergrad at Cal Poly in business administration, and my goal was always to work as an analyst or a consultant with businesses, because I know there's always conflict within the business and also with partner businesses as well. However, my divine path has taken me into family mediation right now. And so while I'm here, I just want to learn as much as I can learn. Very high emotions that I deal with every single day. And so any tools that I can put in my toolbox, I'm here, I'm for it, and I need it. Thank you.
All right, good. Well, thank you. So, Onisha, are you with us now?
Yeah, sorry, I
That's
couldn't
okay.
unmute my So I'm Anisha Kyles. I currently work as a police officer and I'm assigned to the mental health evaluation team. So I just deal with a lot of conflict and working with families, the community, and taking these courses. I'm just trying to find better solutions to communicate with families and to solve a lot of the problems that aren't, necessarily just take someone to the hospital or take someone to jail, and just trying to come up with like different types of resolutions.
All right. Well, great. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate your focus on the humanity of it. That tends to be where my focus is. So one of the challenges I have in and around conflict, and in particular in and around presentations on conflict, is I'm always feeling a lot of dissonance. Tonight I'm feeling dissonance because it's always about time management. There's a lot to talk about and not a lot of time to do it in. So I'll apologize again to the extent I rush us along, or if I interrupt a little to move through some of the points, because we don't have a lot of time and there's so much to talk about. Let's start by playing a quick game. I'm going to say a word and I want you all to just free associate the first thing that comes into your mind, and you can say as much as you want or as little as you want. I'm just going to write down what you say as much as I can. Ready? And you can just shout it out. So you'll need to unmute yourselves. Here it goes. The word is conflict.
People.
Communication.
All right, keep going.
Disagreement.
Pain.
What was that?
Family.
Pain.
Pain. Oh,
Family.
Disagreement.
Resolution.
Resolution.
Anger.
Disagreement.
Anger. Anything else?
Disagreement.
Tika?
Sadness.
Disagreement.
Keep going. Anybody else? Anybody else?
Healthy.
What? Really? Okay.
Disruption.
Disruption.
Growth.
Growth.
Innovation.
Oh, did you say innovation?
Mm-hmm.
What a concept. Oh, you know what? You're just spoiling this for me. You've done this before. Now, normally when I approach a cold room on this, I get all the dark stuff, all the pain and all the suffering and all the fear, because that's at least been my initial programming around conflict. It's an icky thing. It's a dirty word. It's at least that when I was a kid, that was my programming around it. It was something I wanted to avoid. But I heard some things here. What a healthy growth, innovation, resolution. I mean, communication. These are unlikely associations with conflict, except perhaps if people were experienced in conflict management or resolution, they might tend to go there a little more directly. What I'm trying to get at here is that a lot of how we are going to create value in every stage of conflict is going to relate to our perspective. It's going to relate to our perspective about ourselves. It's going to relate to our perspective about others and other others, which I'll get into in a minute. And it's going to relate to our attitude about conflict itself. Now, although we're all agreeable folks, I could probably pick a subject, throw it out there, and if we had a discussion, we'd be in immediate conflict. It could be religion or politics or, sports or any number of things. And that's just natural stuff. So even though we may all be inclined towards a simpatico set of perspectives or approaches about life, we're going to diverge in a lot of ways. So what I'd like to do first is talk very briefly about some of the good things that can come out of conflict, because that's where we need to keep our focus if we're going to create value in conflict. So again, very quick snippets. What are some good things that could come out of conflict?
Pain.
Liberation.
All right.
Development.
Friendships.
Oh, really? Friendship? Like, you mean relationships even?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Liberation.
Wow. All right.
Changes.
Whole group.
Understanding.
Understanding and new understanding.
Yeah.
Right?
And new
Yeah, I
understanding.
understand learning.
Resolutions.
Development.
Development. Okay.
Exposure.
Yeah, well, that's double-edged, but I like it. Okay.
And I'd say learning or shared visions or ideas that you didn't know you had with someone else.
Yeah, so here's how I like to think of it. I've got this program that I do sometimes called Conflict is the Opportunity of a Lifetime. And I sincerely believe it to be true. I believe it to be true because it's what you got, it's what you get. You get to make what you want out of it. So I choose to look at it opportunistically, but in a positive way, not a negative way. And that's going to guide me in terms of creating value. So a couple of ideas, and you've touched on some of these. Conflict is an opportunity to clarify meanings and perspectives in communication. It's an opportunity to minimize dissonance in yourself and in other people when you're dealing with them. You wouldn't think so, but if you commit to that and come about embracing certain techniques for that, you'll find that it is in fact an opportunity to do that. It's an opportunity to define, enhance, and repair relationships. It's an opportunity to prevent further escalation. It's an opportunity to inform yourself on a realistic range of options and timelines. It's an opportunity to personally manage or resolve your own internal conflicts. It's an opportunity to share new skills or perspectives. Someone had said innovation. It's even an opportunity to get more than you bargained for. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way, but in a good way. There's a lot of great things that can come out of conflict, and not just for you, but for others, and or for others. That would be something akin to like third way negotiations. Anyone familiar with that term?
Oh, yeah.
Third way being the benefit of the greater good, not necessarily anyone that's directly involved in the conflict per se, but those that might receive a secondary or tertiary benefit from the approach to conflict, like the world or a country. All right, so with that in mind, let's play one more quick word game. Again, same thing, you'll need to unmute yourselves. And the word is, and it's a free association, again, the word is power.
Misused.
Ooh, misuse, okay.
Abuse.
Abuse, ooh, dark.
Strength,
What was that, strength?
strength,
Okay,
Strength,
Reclaim.
reclaim,
strength,
what was that?
strength.
Strength, okay.
division,
Imbalance.
Mhm.
Influence.
Oh, I like that, influence. Yeah, so, okay. There's some darkness in this power thing, but there's also some brightness again, right? I have a confession to make. One of the guiding principles in my life is the paradox. For those of you who have ever mediated, you know that the paradox lives at the core of mediation, where you're allowing two simultaneously antithetical truths to coexist in your body and mind while you're assisting others with coming to solution. I believe that paradoxes are real. I believe they're the engine of the world. You don't have to believe that with me, but it's going to come up from time to time. I'll submit to you that many of the things we're going to explore today are both true and false, depending upon context, and that's okay. All right, so belief structure plays into this. Our values are going to play into this. I'm going to invite you to consider a couple of things. I want to talk about values, and I want to talk about mission and vision. And I know it seems like it might not be directly on point if you're here to talk about how to create values in conflict, but bear with me for a minute and see what you think. First of all, one of the things that I've noticed about conflict is that there's this really highly advanced technology that humanity has been wrestling with for a long time and doesn't seem to have the hang of yet. Does anybody know what that technology is?
What, the internet?
Close. The internet is a vehicle for it. I'll submit that the technology is communication. I mean, we got the words, we got the language. So why aren't you getting me? Why am I not getting you? Why are we not communicating? Well, sometimes we do. Sometimes the message comes loud and clear, but it's amazing to me how many times we have to decode the message. And for you mediators or social workers out there, sometimes you'll notice that in your own work, that it's like, oh, actually, there's crossed messages here. There's mixed messages. The communication isn't flowing. The words are being spoken, but they're not landing right. They're misinterpreted, or someone can't hear them. They're not present to hear them. They're projecting, or they're reacting to stimuli that is perceived in a different way. So I find that this communication piece is a big part of the problem that we have in and around communicating about conflict. In order to create value at every stage of conflict, we've got to be really clear from the moment we dip our toe into conflict and in the communication about it, that we should have a plan and an understanding rather than going haphazardly into it. Otherwise, we're already into it and we may have created damage before we can create value. So let me start by talking just a little bit about let's just see how to do this best. Let's start by talking just a little bit first about the nature of the human brain. One of the things that I notice is that I go through this pattern. The pattern is something catches my attention. When something catches my attention, I focus on it. And when I focus on it, then I act based upon having focused on it. This is kind of essential human behavior. So let's talk about what gets our attention. Well, one thing that gets my attention is something that's remarkable. You know, something truly remarkable will get my attention. But another thing that gets my attention are, oh, I don't know, maybe biases, triggers. And I'll fully admit that I have them. I can trace a lot of them. So what I'd like to start with is just let's play with the notion of what might catch our attention. And to do that, we have to talk about, let's talk about biases, if you don't mind. It's personal work, but what the heck. Again, shout it out. Anybody have any? Well, before we even get to, no, let's just do it. We'll do it this way. Anybody have any biases?
I do.
All right, shout them out. Let's hear your biases.
I don't like men that beg for money.
All right.
That was
Okay.
very specific, Rachel.
Okay.
I'm
Others?
sure I have a list. I'm trying to think. I am like, I don't know if it's a bias, but I'm not an animal person. And it's not that I have any issues with anybody who is an animal person, but it's sort of like something I just kind of don't get. So
All right. Others?
I like old people, not kids.
Okay. I don't like. Oh, go ahead, Meager.
No, I was going to say I am biased against arrogant people. I absolutely, I'm a bully when it comes to arrogant people.
You took it.
I will pick on them to death.
You took the words
So that's
right
a
out
bias
of my
and something that I'm working on. So
No. You took the words right out of my mouth.
Anne-Marie has joined us at the most perfect time. She probably wonders what she's walked into.
Okay, so the question is, hi there, Anne-Marie. The question is, and you can unmute yourself and shout it out as you like to go. We're exploring bias and triggers. What's your bias? Tell us your bias. I don't like I don't like sloppiness much. That's one for me. Oh, I'm not big on people that aren't punctual. That's just my thing because I have to be. What
Well,
else?
I don't like violence against children or women, period.
All right. I get that.
I don't like littering.
What's that one?
Littering,
Yeah.
people who litter for no reason.
And so all right. So we've identified a few things. So they're triggering, right? These things are triggering. What happens when you get triggered?
Oh, it's just time for some people to just step out of your personal space. Because voices get elevated, blood pressure goes up, and it's really trying to get back to that, as we were talking about earlier, that level where you have that emotional intelligence and you can stop yourself. You know, you can start to self-regulate so that you don't respond to the trigger.
You mentioned a physical response. That's really kind of interesting because it often does do that, right? Makes your blood boil, makes your, your skin crawl. There's all these phrases we use for how we get triggered, how we respond to bias. But one of the things that I used to always remark about when I'd explore bias is I'd always forget the bright side of bias, because there's a positive bias too, and it's still bias, right? I like people that like the same music that I listen to. I like people that look a certain way or that act a certain way, or I'm drawn to them. And I might
I
easily
like people who are peace builders
peace builders,
and
there you go.
resolvers, conflict resolvers.
And I might be biased towards them. I might actually skew things in the direction of someone I'm biased towards. So it's interesting to note where our attention might go in either a positive or a negative way when we're embracing conflict. Similarly, don't forget that there's a lot of internal process. Remember, we talked about externals and internals. And so there's always this internal process that's coming up as well, such as, well, gee, I have all these assumptions now too, based upon my bias, either positive or negative, related to needs or options or resources or intentions, or whether someone's really an obstacle or an opposition. I have all these projections about them that come from me and my shadow self and my past experience. I see humans as other, as interference, as an obstacle, as opposed to a human being. And I then might do the next thing, which is to focus on that. And when I focus on that, then I amplify it. And then I might take action based upon my focus, either positively or negatively. And before you know it, I'm skewed and let's just say approaching conflict from a bias foundation, which is unhelpful. It's going to be very difficult, first of all, to engage in conflict management or conflict resolution. And secondly, it's going to be very difficult to create value. So I want to play another very quick game with you. This is something I stole from somebody that you may or may not recognize, who talks about self-help and topics like that. This is a focus exercise, okay? So the focus exercise is, I want you all to look around in your room. What you're going to do is this. You're going to look around in your room and we're going to do this for 30 seconds or so. And I want you to inventory in your room and in your mind everything that has a certain characteristic. And then I want you to close your eyes and try and recall what I'm going to ask you next, okay? So in your room, I want you to look around for 30 seconds and inventory everything that's white. And then in 30 seconds, I want you to close your eyes. Everything that's white. Hopefully you've got some things that are white in your room. All right, so we're getting on about 8 more seconds to go. Make sure you got everything that's white in your room. Okay, now close your eyes. Keep them closed and tell me everything that's red in your room. And you can call it out. You need to unmute your mics.
I got nothing, man, but I had to
I
open my
have-
eyes to hit the unmute.
I have a red heart
Flower,
on my
garment.
teddy bear.
Sour cream label.
Throw pillow.
Okay. Now,
Mm,
what's interesting,
Tablecloths, cups, flowers.
all right. What's interesting about this exercise, at least for me, is that focus was an exclusionary action. I had to exclude data in order to focus on what it was I was looking for, and then I found it. Now, if I were to ask you everything that's red in your room now that your eyes are open, you'd probably see a lot of additional things. So where our mind goes and what we latch onto once we're triggered or biased or affected in any way can get skewed really quickly. We can lose our footing right from the start before we ever get started. And then there's no way to create value in conflict. And the roots of the bias, they could be anthropological, they could be sociological, they could be neurobiological, they could be trauma informed, they could be political, philosophical. There's all kinds of reasons why. So again, we need to be very conscious of all of these things that are operating. So how do we get past our bias? How do we get past other people's bias, whether positive or negative? Get past the pitfalls, some of the other pitfalls that may prevent us from starting in the right place to be able to create any value? Well, there's a few more things I want to discuss before we get there. One relates to our identity. Let's assume that we can get past all of the bias aspects of this, more or less. Admitting that, of course, you can't rid yourself of bias, but you can at least be conscious of it. You can do work in and around it. But then you've got,
please, excuse me, I have a worry.
yeah,
Is when you talk about bias, we have bias and stereotype. Are they the same in this context?
bias and
Stereotype. When you have
certainly there, stereotypes are a form of are working with bias, certainly. And it's often based upon either projection or based upon past models or fears. And that's one aspect of it. What I want to get to as a foundational place for starting to create value is, what are your values? What are your personal values? And what's your personal mission? Now, it seems unrelated, but what I found after all the work I've done in this area is that it's the starting point for me. There's a few other fundamental pieces I'd love to discuss, but it's kind of a rather lengthy way of going about it. Suffice it to say that I came to explore my values by first getting in touch with my core self. And I use core, C-O-R-E, as kind of an acronym to orient myself as to my culture and my cultural bias, right? I'm a child of the 60s. I'm a white male, influenced by the underpinning of the American counterculture. For starters, that's my cultural orientation. Origin, my orientation. Well, believe it or not, I grew up on an 18th century giant farm where I studied by candlelight. My parents were of Jewish descent, but I was raised as a Catholic. I went to a fancy boarding school at a young age. It influences how I think about things, how I perceive data, at least initially. My relationships. Well, my relationships come from my different activities. I'm a musician, I'm a writer, I'm into construction, I'm a lawyer. I even have uncategorized friends, but it kind of influences my mindset, my worldview, my emotional nature, how I come to show up in conflict, just as a starting point. And of course, E in the core would be my enterprise, what I do. I'm a lawyer, I'm a mediator, I'm a musician, I'm a writer. These things influence who I might think is simpatico or antithetical, how I might react from the get-go. All right, this stuff put me in touch with my values. I'm going to invite you to consider building a basket of values. The reason I suggest this is, have you ever seen mission statements on the wall of various places? I got impressed by mission statements, as much for the wrong reasons as the right reasons. I got impressed by mission statements because the organizations weren't living up to their mission. I also got impressed when they were. So mission statements are going to flow out of your values. And I would submit to you that the basket of personal values that you want to build to bring to conflict needs to be complete. You can't leave anything out. By the same token, you can't overburden the basket because it won't be effective. So let's play another very quick game. What kind of values might be useful for a person that wanted to approach conflict and create value in conflict? What kind of values?
Objectiveness.
Okay, objectivity. What else?
Nurturing.
Okay, I like that.
Neutrality.
Sorry.
Neutrality. You have to be neutral, impartial.
Okay, now we're not necessarily talking about being a mediator, but okay, I hear you. How about patience?
Honesty.
I was
Patience,
just going to say honesty too.
Understanding.
Transparency,
I
maybe?
see. Mhm.
What else we got?
Accountability.
Oh, I like that. Accountability. That's a good one. What else?
Understanding.
Okay. Energy,
Mhm.
clarity, if I didn't say it. What else we got? Anything come to mind?
unbiased.
Okay. What I'm getting, oh, go ahead.
I was say collaborative.
Okay, collaborative nature. Empathy, maybe?
Yeah, empathy, compassion, integrity.
Oh, integrity, I like that too. Okay. And we could explore, if we had the time, why some of these things would be valuable. I think intuitively you know that a lot of this is because it builds trust and it builds relationship and it demonstrates that you're approaching conflict with goodwill, right? So these are important things to understand and to be in touch with when you're engaging in conflict. What good is the beautiful basket of values if you're just not patient? Right? You missed one, an important value. So it becomes kind of important to really delve into what your values are so that when you approach conflict, you don't just do it haphazardly, but you align yourself with your values. You kind of prime the pump, both internally and then also ultimately externally with your opposition for an optimal result. So what I realized after I explored my own values is that I was on this mission. Turns out I was on a mission and I was able to articulate my mission. So I consider myself at this point what I might call a freak of nurture. I'm on a mission to maximize the probability of favorable outcomes from human interaction. That's what I'm about. I could do it with music. I could do it with mediation. I could probably do it with litigation if I had to. And I could do it by any number of other means, depending upon what we're talking about. It's a broad mission, but I've come to realize that that's my mission because I keep showing up in the different contexts of my life, trying to give or share in the same way, whether it's through the music or whether it's through the mediation. So I'm going to invite you to consider that and to really get behind why it is you show up at a showdown so that we can get to the point of talking about various ways in which you could create some value. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to blast ahead into some of those techniques and ask you to take this very seriously, because a lot of us, even those of us that are trained in conflict, just show up to conflict. I mean, I roll out of bed and I'm litigating every day. I can just like show up, can I? Well, I don't see it that way. See, I see the space of conflict as a sacred space. It's a sacred space where I am invited to show up with my values and live my mission. It's the only way I can deliver any kind of consistency, for starters, so that each one of you would know who you were dealing with if you were in conflict with me, because I would be consistent. It's the best way for me to optimize and maximize the probability of a favorable outcome, even in conflict. So it tends to require some rather deep work to do well, because you're not only engaging other, but you're engaging self. You ever roll out of bed the wrong way, wrong side? You ever send that email you wish you hadn't sent? You ever use the wrong finger when you're waving at people? You know, if you have, then you've started from the wrong place. It's been a really difficult to create value in conflict when you start from that place. Possibly because you're out of alignment with your values, even if only in that moment. Possibly because you're out of alignment with your mission, even only if in that moment. Now, each of you may have a very different role in conflict. I mean, these days I show up, I'm a trial attorney. As much as I'm a mediator, I haven't been doing it much. So it's a different function that I'm showing up in as conflict, in engaging in conflict. What if you're in the military? You know, what if you're a social worker, and in what context, and how the context might affect you? So your role becomes important as much as your value system and the mission. All right, now assuming that you can get all of that together, you know, Renata talked about a concept that I really like quite a bit, which was, I think the phrase was regulation. And I think of self-regulation a lot. And there's so many aspects of that: regulating your bias, regulating your emotions, you know, your projections, your assumptions, all of those things. These are practices that we train in for our own purposes, oftentimes either as mediators or sometimes as disputants involved in conflict. And they become important methodologies and modalities to use. So don't forget also that some of us approach conflict with a different intent. Might have a punitive intent, or a fatalistic attempt, or an opportunistic intent, or a retributive intent, or an altruistic intent in and around conflict. But let's talk about ways in which, assuming that you can get an understanding of where you're coming from and try and stay rooted, stay anchored in that mission, in that set of values, how you might create value. So let's start with just a little bit of brainstorming, because again, I'm kind of rushing to the punchline so we can talk about some of the techniques as opposed to the overarching theory behind it. But there are definite practices for aligning oneself with values and coming to a mission. By the way, before I go on to this, I just want to invite you to consider, because I do consider identifying values and formulating a mission statement to be one of the most important things you can do. But I want to caution you very carefully that the mission you start today may not be the mission you end up on tomorrow, and your values may change. So always good to check in with yourself to make sure that you haven't changed to the point that you need to modify how you approach things. But assuming that we're on the same page about that, let's explore what would be some of the methods for creating value at every stage of conflict. First of all, I'll submit that you need to distinguish your beliefs from your values. I may not like arrogant people just like Meager doesn't like them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that I can't engage in conflict with someone who's arrogant. I may need to have a certain level of self-knowledge about my own biases. I may need to have a certain level of knowledge about my own emotional tendency to shut down, to be less than open. But it's important because my core values might resonate and still align with someone who's arrogant. It's possible. So after we monitor our values and the fact that they change over time, we need to be involved in being aligned with our own interests. Now, I'll use this example. It's come up a lot in conflict resolution circles. It's a story of two chefs and an orange. Have you heard this story? All right. So, we'll say it's at the White House. In the White House, they're having a really fancy meal, and it's very important because the fate of the world is involved, and we really want to make a good impression and do things just right. And so they've got this fancy meal set up for the heads of state, and the chefs in the back are fighting over an orange because, you know, when they went shopping for whatever reason, they only got one orange. And the main chef wants to make duck l'orange, and the dessert chef needs to make this fancy orange dessert. And they're fighting and they're fighting and they're fighting, and it's getting late, and the dinner needs to be served. And finally, the head chef comes in and says, I have a degree in conflict resolution. And he whips out he or she whips out a carving knife, and they cut the orange in half. They give one half to the dessert chef, and they give one half to the regular chef, and say, problem solved. Well, everybody was saying, I want the orange. They were stating their position. I want the orange. It's my position. It's not my interest. You see, as a dessert chef, I only need the peel. I just need the peel for what I'm going to do. And as the main chef, I just need the innards. I don't need the peel. But nobody ever actually articulated their interests. They only articulated their position. I need the orange. And so there was a lack of alignment with interest enough that one could communicate effectively what was really needed. So the solution that came about wasn't engineered for the problem. Well, that's a function of not being in touch with one's interest. And it's also a function of not being able to articulate with clarity what is needed. So these are parts of the problem that if we come to identify as we go through conflict, we can say, well, what would be the solution? One solution would be to be really clear about what my interests are, and to have a skill set of being able to articulate with clarity what my needs are without triggering your biases, without putting you in a defensive place. So let's explore some ways in which, because we've got about, 24 minutes or so, let's explore some ways that we can bring value to every stage of the conflict right from the beginning. All right, we got some training as mediators and social workers in triggers, in bias, in means and methods and skills for languaging and being personally present and trying to minimize the detrimental effects of poor communication or communication landing badly. What would be ways in which we could add value? Well, let's assume that we're going to engage in conflict. We know we're going to engage in conflict. First thing, and we experimented with this a little bit, is that a lot of us are programmed to have a dissonant reaction. It's like, oh, I'm about to engage in communication around conflict. ew, I'd rather not. Well, what if you recalibrate that thinking? Because the fact of the matter is, the conflict exists. Maybe the conflict needs to be resolved or managed. Maybe there's some kind of benefit to be had by engaging in it. But in any event, it's part of life and you need to deal with it. Maybe it's an opportunity. Maybe it's an opportunity of a lifetime. Maybe by considering it as a vehicle for the expression of our values and our mission. Because what's your other alternative? Avoidance, maybe. Maybe it's an opportunity to step up and show up and create some value. Well, how would we create some value? Well, I talked before about internal and external manifestations. Let's start with the internal manifestation. When I go into engage with another around conflict, how about I prime myself for that experience rather than just like rolling out of bed and doing it? How about I say, you know what? Let me just check myself. Did I wake up on the right side of the bed? How am I feeling? Am I mad at the cat? Do I need to get over it before I can like center myself? You know, check myself physically. How fast is my heart beating? How mad am I? You know, where am I coming from as a baseline? To prepare myself to execute my values and my worldview and my mission accordingly in conflict. So I don't come in mad as hell. So I don't come in without clarity. So I don't come in distracted, because it's a sacred space. So my orientation prior to engaging with anyone in conflict is that this is a sacred space. It's a sacred space for me as much as it is for them. And one of the reasons for that, and help me here because it's one word. What's the word that seems to come up more than anything else, certainly in mediation? It's the one thing that seems to be a big issue in and around conflict. Anybody?
I want to say fairness. Everybody think that you're favoring someone over the other person.
Okay, close. It's close to what I'm looking for. My father always said, "Son, life's not fair." A judge told me that recently too. What I'm looking for is, oh, Aretha said it.
Respect.
Yeah, respect. Little goes a long way. It's pretty hard to do when you're mad. It's pretty hard to do when you're triggered. It's pretty hard to do when you're righteous. By the way, sometimes you might be right or even righteous, and you're going to have to come down off of that a bit to create value in conflict, right? So, okay, respect. So priming the pump for self and other means dealing with a lot of things as a baseline prior to engaging around conflict, like dealing with your feelings of inadequacy, if you've got that, if you've got internal darkness or internal impediments to your ability to be clear about your values and your mission, maybe a lack of assertiveness, other impediments, just totally internally prior to showing up. You're going to have to make peace with some of that stuff. You're going to have to do some dark work. When I say you, I mean me, I mean everybody. That's what we ones do in an effort to try and get clear and courageous around how we're going to express around conflict. So self-respect, self-clarity, all these concepts that we're going to talk about, they're going to shine in and they're going to shine out as well. What's another thing that we could do that might create value on the front end when we engage with someone? And it's the same thing, we'll do it for ourselves and we do it for other people. We show some respect. What else could we do? Renata, there you go.
Sorry, I know.
All right.
I have a Mac, Jed, and I'm just not used to using it. I would say to exercise patience with people, exercise patience and be willing to meet them where they are, wherever they are in that moment.
It's a radical concept. What if they're mad as hell? Whoa. That's
They
what
have
you
a right
got.
to, whatever they've experienced that's created that anger, that frustration. It's not my role to challenge that. It's to say, okay, let's talk about that.
And it sounds to me like meeting them where they are is something that comes out of your value system and your sense of mission.
Very much so.
So it's kind of natural. I mean, it may not be easy at times, but it's natural.
Definitely not easy, but I think when you've done this work, you recognize that there is a value in working with people where they are, not trying to shift them to where you want them to be or where the other person expects them to be, but where they are, and giving them that appreciation and, as you said, the respect to be and to feel whatever it is they're dealing with.
Anything less would probably be a power play,
It would be.
right? Good. Other insights here? Patience. Well, first of all, patience means we might need to slow things down a little bit, which if you're inclined to not like dissonance might mean it's just going to increase the pain, but actually sometimes it's necessary, right? And we've talked, or I'm sure you've all talked in social work and in mediation about the tempo of things, how quickly or slowly process goes and how the body might react to the change in tempo and texture. It's very critical. What are some of the other ways, just on the front end, before we even get into the substance of this stuff, of the conflict, that
Walk in with a smile.
What's that?
Walk in with a smile. Set the tone.
Ooh, with a smile.
I don't know. I don't think for me personally, because some people may feel it offensive if they're sad or mad and we smiling. So I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence with that one.
Okay, fair enough. So a quick aside. When I used to teach a lot of mediation, I talk about personal presence. We're going to get into it in a minute because there's a lot of aspects of personal presence and active listening and all of those things. And one of the things that I consider one of my strengths is my ability to be very personally present.
Yes.
One of the ways that I do that is with eye contact. And so I would be doing these mediations and I'd have all this intense eye contact, right? Like I'm giving you everything I got. And at one point, somebody took me aside and said, "Hey, man, you're creeping me out with all that eye contact." It's like, well, wait a minute, but this is a gift of my soul. But the point is well taken, right? And so, Anne Marie, both things can be true. Here we are talking about that, the coexistence of the paradox, that in some sense, it could be a gift. And in another sense, the smile could be seen as something that's not authentic or that triggers somebody. And that's why we're going to have to be very sensitive in the moment to how things land. And that when we give our best smile or our best eye contact, we need to respect the fact that it might be well received, or that we need to be sensitive that maybe it's not the appropriate way to approach. But it's a good tool to consider. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think of this one, just front end. Validation. I want to validate that someone I'm in opposition with has a valid reason for feeling the way they do. Now, look, we can sort it out later, and maybe they're just an asshole, or maybe they're just crazy. But maybe you're not completely clear about reality, and maybe there's a certain valid perspective. Or maybe you're clear about reality, and both truths coexist, even though they're antithetical. It does no harm to validate someone's perspective. You don't have to agree with them. When you validate them, and there's all kinds of phrases one could use without capitulating or waiving your interests, you immediately show RESPECT. And you, I don't want to say empower, but you might share to empower because you don't want, you're not in the position to empower someone, but you might be able to share a dynamic by which they could self-empower in engaging you in conflict. Immediately, we're creating some value here. We're opening a channel. We're building mutual respect. It's a first step. All right, here's another one. Presenting authentic self. Now we're back to the smile, Anne-Marie, and it might be an authentic smile, but it just wasn't received that way, or it might be just the most beautiful thing that unlocks the tightest locked door, and you go, oh, that smile just did it for me. So things to consider. What's that?
I use the smile. I'm using the smile to set my tone too, because like you said earlier, it's like if you're having a bad day, you got to pull yourself out of the trenches. And I know, like Rachel says, sometimes it looks condescending and it kind of comes across, I mean, depending on your body style, but it's like if I'm going into this and I've had just the crappiest day ever, I got to put a smile on my face, and that's going to automatically give some internal triggers to relax and set my tone.
Yep.
And so I wonder like how body style affects so much because of all the different cultural influences.
Very true. And, you know, and this is where it all kind of implodes, because when you start to get into like cultural awareness and situational awareness around, you know, trauma-informed circumstances and the like, you're so busy trying to read internally and externally at the same time and react and do what's appropriate. And it's a moving target, especially when there's a lot of different elements involved. So let's back up for a second and talk about, just generally speaking, when I talk about sacred space, for me, and I always used to say this in the context of mediation. Whenever I was doing mediation or instructing on mediation, I say, you know, look at this doorway into the mediation chamber. There's a threshold there. When your foot crosses the threshold, you're walking into a sacred space. And if you don't like honor that, acknowledge that, take the time to put yourself in the zone of what's required to really participate in that way, then you're missing the opportunity. You're missing the opportunity to create the value. So what's it going to take for you? Well, it might take 6 cups of coffee. It might take a prayer. It might take, it's up to you what your value system is and what your mission is as to how you're going to get yourself into the place of being able to have a centered mind, body, emotion, and spirit necessary to be your best self to create value in conflict. Before you open your mouth or before you show your body in any way in relation to other related to conflict. And then, of course, all that body language stuff comes into play under presence and a lot of those other things. The nature of the language you use, the inflection, the tonality, the tempo, all of that stuff is critically important. The clothes you wear, maybe, the set and the setting, all of those things become critically important. Let me turn this darn phone off. There we go. Okay, so, and you know, things about that would also include emotional clarity. Like, what's going on for you? How present can you be? Are you distracted? Can you show up? Can you focus on what you need to do? Your own body awareness. All right, so assuming that we can work with some of those concepts, how about presenting authentic self? I mean, are you good sense? Are you a good judge of who's being authentic and who isn't? God, there's some people that it's like, oh, you're killing me. You're just not real. You know, I want to believe that, but it's just, I can't, you're not real. Versus somebody who shows up and they're real. You know, they may be ragged, but they're real. And it goes a long way to building trust in where we're going to be able to bring value to conflict is in relationship and in our own example and in our own consistency with ourselves as well as with others. And a lot of that's going to be around authenticity. A lot of that's going to be around developing skills related to that. So let's talk for a minute about some of those skills. Well, we've got present skills, and hopefully we'll have a few minutes to talk about some of those things. We've got the power of silence. What did he say? Oh, the power of silence. Does it improve on the silence? If it doesn't, it's probably not worth saying. Right? We're taught a lot, especially in this culture, at least I was as a white male of my generation, to exercise power and to fill the gaps with silence and to flex my will. And no, maybe that's bad juju there. That's not really the way it works. The power of silence is an amazing thing. Active listening. And active listening might mean more than with your ears. Might mean with your eyes. It might mean like, what's going on with this person? Why are they leaning back? Why are they leaning forward? Why are they fidgeting? Why am I fidgeting? You know, all of that stuff. To just get really centered, because at any moment, the communication could stop flowing. The words might keep going, but no one's actually communicating. So in order to keep value going in conflict, we've got to keep it real and we've got to get to the substance. All right, so let's assume that we can show respect. We can create validation, credible validation, not like lip service, obsequious stuff, but real statements of validation by presenting our authentic self. What's next? How about, oh, by the way, in addition to active listening, active curiosity. I was going to put up this background. I didn't want to offend anybody. It would be the dead cat background. And the dead cat was going to be the mascot. Whiskers was going to be our mascot for today, because I wanted to remind you that curiosity is going to get you there. Legitimate, real curiosity. We only have to kill the cat one time to get the message. Sometimes when all else fails and you're present in conflict, be curious. Use an open paradigm. Assume that maybe you're mistaken. Quest to really understand what's the driver on the other side. For starters, okay? Active listening, active curiosity, and focused attention. Demonstrate to the people that you're engaged with that you're focused on them. That you're not just waiting for them to speak, that your eyes aren't rolling like you're looking at the ceiling, like you're trying to think of the next thing to say to them as soon as they stop speaking, but actually show that you're focused and attentive to them. This is like currency, man. This is valuable stuff. All right, what next? How about demonstrating good faith? It's a big concept in the law, good faith, as opposed to bad faith or just going through the motions, or those folks that mediate because they have to mediate in order to be able to litigate. So they show up to mediate, but they don't really want to mediate. Talking about real good faith. And you can demonstrate that in any number of ways depending upon your circumstance. Someone had said before, accountability, taking some accountability, showing some responsibility, stating your intention, being inclusive with those with whom you're opposed, and demonstrating that consistently. I'm in a case right now. It is the most bitter case you can ever imagine. It is horrendous. And yet I've managed to build enough relationship with plaintiff's counsel. There's the evil one and the good one, and build enough relationship that I've at least got a back channel. I can at least talk about things before everything hits the fan if I have to. There's a tremendous value in that. And the only way I could do that was by presenting my authentic self and validating that other person and showing some respect and showing some consistent good faith. But once we've got that, what else? Because we're coming down to the wire here. How about indulging in open dialectic, assuming you're not objective, suspending your judgment? Man, judgment is one of the worst things that can happen in trying to resolve conflict. I mean, judgment is one of the things that gets in the way. You know, you think everyone thinks they've got good judgment. Well, you know, good judgment comes from experience, but a lot of that comes from bad judgment. So we're back in it again. I would not hold a lot of faith necessarily in the judgment. Keep the open paradigm and the open dialectic. What else have we got then? How about avoiding closed paradigms like judgment? And a lot of this may flow from your belief structure. And your belief structure is fine and dandy, but your belief structure may not serve your interests. It may be your beliefs, but we're more focused here with your interests and your values and your mission if you really want to try and engage in conflict. Because you can't necessarily get everything you want and everything you believe. So avoid judgment, avoid projections, avoid assumptions, avoid ascribing nefarious or evil intentions. Dear Renata, when you wrote this, I know you meant such and so and so. It's going to put her on the defensive immediately. It might not even be true. I get nothing by ascribing an evil intention to somebody. Even if they've got it, there are ways of addressing it that would validate, that would invite collaboration rather than.
Can you give an example on that?
Sure. As an example, dear Renata, when you said so and so, I know what you really meant was to pull a punch and insult my family. Well, maybe I'm projecting. Maybe the better way to do this is to say, dear Renata, I realize that when last you communicated, it sounded like you were expressing anger and concern. I'd like to meet you on that and discuss the topic. There are a lot of other ways of doing this that don't require ascribing a negative intention or a bad act to somebody, even if they're being a bad actor, even if you're convinced of that. So
using reframing.
Certainly by reframing, right? And again, I apologize. You're probably sensing my dissonance as the time is running out, but I'm trying to give you a little more of the techniques related to value that flow out of the clarity with your mission and with your values. So I'm just going to blast through a few more and then open this up to some questions. Much like mediation, you're going to also avoid negative thinking, right? Closed paradigm. You're going to avoid impatience, frustration, futility, emotionalism, or irrationality. You're going to want to create a safe space, just like mediation or social work, right? Whether it's virtual or personal, whether it's caucused. You're going to build relationships by exercising your emotional intelligence, by utilizing active listening, focused attention, building trust, demonstrating consistency, modeling good behavior, even if others don't. By being consistent, if you lose your temper somewhere along the line in this process, you blow your credibility, you blow the trust, you blow the safety. So all of these things are critically important to build and preserve in the dynamic of your communication. All right, let's assume we get this far, right? You've demonstrated your active listening, your emotional intelligence, you've built trust, you've showed consistency, you've modeled good behavior, you're showing your transparency. What else? Well, most of these conflicts are data-driven. So you're going to have a method of identifying all essential data necessary for you to harvest, to enable you to make intelligent decisions and choices in conflict. You can't be so distracted by the fog of war that you forget to collect certain data that would make it impossible for you to know how to resolve a conflict or manage a conflict. Similarly, you want to exchange necessary data meaningfully with the other side without triggering them. I like to use acronyms that are generally ugly. I would call them swear word acronyms, but things that are negative that you tend to remember. So here's one, IRS. Because nobody really likes the IRS all that much. And it's, where did I go? All my notes. To inform, to relate, and to support. So if I'm in conflict with you, I want to inform you of what's at issue, what's of concern, not in a way that's shameful, not in a way that's blaming, not in a way that's judgmental, for purposes of sharing data. I want to relate it to you in a respectful way. And I want to support you in your evaluation of it and in your response to it. You don't have to agree with me, and I want to give you permission to disagree with me so that we can enter into a discourse, because we are now engaged in a civil manner of dispute resolution or management, which as big boys and girls and others, we can hopefully work out together. All right, what else? How about communicating with precision? Here's where a lot goes wrong. Being precise with our language, which might require some cultural competence. It might require not talking above somebody or talking below somebody. Meeting someone where they are with respect to their cultural background, with respect to their physical or mental abilities or disabilities, all of which might actually be considered part of active listening as you're identifying the context in which you're showing up and in which the conflict is arising. A couple more things really quickly, because I know we're out of time. You need to demonstrate that you're available and responsive to your enemies, to your opposition. RESPECT, right? You need to disrupt your routine strategies. I'll sue. I'll call my lawyer. I'll avoid. I won't take his calls, right? And then there's all kinds of ways to talk about value very quickly. Fungibility, do you know what that concept is? Fungibility? Could I give you $1 in my pocket for the dollar in your pocket? Would that work for you? Probably would, because they're fungible. They're worth the same. One is the same as the other. So could I give you $1 for 4 quarters? Would you do that? Probably. How about if I give you $1 for 3 quarters? Would you do that? Absolutely, right? Well, maybe the 3 quarters is worth more to me than $1 because the parking meters only take quarters. And I need to park here right now. So the value of things are not necessarily how they appear. Things that may appear to be fungible may not be. Or things that may appear to be unique and have unique value may be fungible. It depends on circumstances. So it's really easy to get caught up in thinking you understand the actual value of a thing that's being discussed, in addition to all of these other things of value that you bring to the conflict in order to pave the way, to create the path for people to remain open and responsive in dialogue so that you can work through stuff. It's, well, this is a non-starter for me. Okay, what would make it more acceptable to you? That's a conversation that can be had. But it can't be had after you've told somebody to go pound sand. It can't be had after you've used 6 adjectives to describe their mother. You're done. And so it's really critical to realize that you need to be patient and courageous and not give up. And by showing up and demonstrating your values and demonstrating the consistency of your mission in conflict, that you can work this through. So I'm out of time. All I can say is 2 other things to consider. There's a secondary benefit to this that relates to how you can start to see yourself when you show up this way. Even if you don't resolve a conflict, even if you can't manage it, you can rely on the fact that you're living a mission and you're living your values. Sometimes it's the best we get to do, and sometimes that example makes all the difference. Maybe not in this conflict, but in the next one. And then the last thing just to reference is the tertiary benefits, what I call the third way, the greater good, that sometimes by approaching things in this way, being consistent, expressing with clarity through your dissonance and living your values in your mission, there's a greater good that's served, whether it's your local community or a higher purpose. And sometimes you'll see it, sometimes you might not see it, but sometimes it's another motivator for why to approach conflict in this way. So in closing, I'll say one of the things that I've learned is that my understanding of power is inaccurate. And all of the strategies that I've utilized in my life to exercise my power have done exactly the opposite of what I thought I would accomplish. I've demonstrated bad faith. I've demonstrated an attempt to manipulate. I've demonstrated an attempt not to meet people where they are, but to demand them to meet me where I am. And I've poisoned the well before ever starting. I've already gotten people to react negative to me when I first open my mouth, when I first use inexact language or the language of power rather than the language of collaboration. So a few things to think about in wrapping it up, that the way to bring value to conflict at every stage starts with self-knowledge. It starts with commitment. What is your commitment to yourself in conflict? Do you care? Are you just a nihilist about it? Or do you want to try and utilize your skills and your personal presence to increase the likelihood of a favorable outcome when engaging in conflict? Conflict's going to happen. But these are some ways for you to prime the pump for yourself and for others. It's the best that you can do. The last point on this, of course, is to make sure that you understand what's at stake. One of the things that I always ask people at mediation is, what's the worst kind of dispute you could have in a mediation? And other than, let's say, a violent one, what's the answer?
The person who doesn't come with the intent to work things out, it's a pretense that they're there. They have no intent to address the issue.
I would agree, it's good faith, but presuming that there is good faith, the next thing would be somebody who doesn't know what they want.
Oh, well, that's what everybody did, pretty
Or
much.
what they need. Well, it would be helpful to know. And so many
Yeah.
of us engage in conflict without knowing. And you get to that place where you might be able to do something that's like, I don't know what I want. Otika?
I gotta say this. All night I've been holding back, wanting to ask you, how do you get a person to closer to readiness? And I should know how to do this, right? Because I'm trained, but I failed today with this one in particular, with this one person in particular. I always fail with him. And I was so stressed out. I became that impatient person. So all this stuff you're saying to me, I'm like, yeah, I did that. Because I can't push him to this stage of readiness, right? So at first I jokingly said, you said, what kind of person is the worst disputant to have? I said one with borderline personality disorder, right? And then, no, seriously, it's a person who doesn't know what they want. Like this guy who's very ill. I'm trained to help him. I know exactly what to do, but he won't allow it because he's like, I don't know. Here's the list of answers right here. I'll basically do this stuff for you. But right when I get him to the part where let me facilitate this, or let me do this stuff, let me make that referral, let me all this stuff. And he's like, I don't know. And his anxiety and depression. I'm like, dang. So today, it's how do I get, not just in therapy, but anywhere, a person who they're at your meeting for a reason. They're at your office for a reason. They're at your session for a reason. So but they won't say, I want it. And I can't force them because it's not a locked facility and they're not court ordered. So I can't force them.
It's sometimes difficult to assist non-assertives in being assertive, right? One thing I'll suggest, it's a source that I've used with a lot of fondness. I suppose I get charged a fee if I even mention it, but I'll do it anyway, is Marshall Rosenberg. And I don't know if you're familiar with Marshall Rosenberg, but if you're not, I'd urge you to go look at some of his material. He's got, I believe, a 3 or 4 hour lecture online that's just remarkable. And essentially the premise is the use of language is almost always a power play. The only thing you ever really get to do with language is express your needs. So one way to do this might be to use language to express what you need. And I like to think of Jerry Maguire, if you've ever seen the movie. Help me, help you. So an example might be, I really need to be of benefit to you. because I'm committed to trying to help you, I get frustrated in my inability to fulfill that need when I perceive you as being non-assertive. Now, this would be in someone that could appreciate that or understand that. It's one way to have the real, authentic conversation, because after all, it's really about your need. It's not about trying to exact power. It's not about trying to get an outcome for any reason other than something personal that you need. And sometimes that's enough for someone to hear it and respond to it and go, oh, you're not trying to control me. You're sharing new information about your mission or your values or your efforts. And I might be able to be more responsive to that.
Thank you.
Sure, just an idea. Anyway, I apologize that I couldn't go into a lot of the underpinnings that I think are useful and appropriate in all of this. And while it seems like it might just be some empty talk about values and some clarity and some, use of language and body language and all of that, when taken as a full package and when understood that you're directing all of this with intention and not doing it happenstance or piecemeal, but with the intention of trying to keep everything open, both for self and other, internally and externally, it's the best path you have. The best alternative and the worst alternative to a negotiated agreement would be the range of other possibilities. And it's worth being realistic and pragmatic about those and knowing what they are, because a lot of them are unacceptable, like litigation generally. Once you know that, then you'll know what hollow threats are, and you'll know where the parameters are for trying to be pragmatic about getting something done. But if you've blown it from the get-go, if you've shown a lack of respect, if you've shown inauthenticity, if you've shown a distraction or a lack of clarity, a tone deafness about culture or identity, good luck to you. And if anyone has ever done any of these things right for you in conflict, you might have responded favorably, and so you'll see the value. You'll know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I don't want to take more of your time. I've already gone over, but I'm happy to answer questions or come back again.